Good morning. Welcome to the garden. Thanks for being here this morning. I thought you'd all be home suffering from holiday fatigue. I don't think so. We're glad you're here today. You've probably heard folks say that the older you get, the faster time seems to go. Well, it seems to me that I'm getting older, and this whole year has just flown by. It's just amazing that we're already at the end of 2013 and getting ready to step into 2014. So we thought this might be an appropriate time for us to reflect a little bit on what this last year has been like, and then to begin to clarify a little bit more our hopes and dreams for the following year, for 2014. Now, for each of us, there's been a certain uniqueness about what's happened to us, and we've probably experienced our ups and downs, our successes and our failures, our beginnings and our ends. And I say that because mostly every day is filled with that kind of thing, and that's the commonality that we all share together. I know there are probably some who'll be really happy to see this year end. Maybe there's a lot of regrets, or maybe it's been a sad year or a very difficult year in one way or another, so be ready to kiss this year goodbye. There are others that might be quite nostalgic that this year has come to an end because it's been really significant, or there have been some highlights or some really special times in this year. And we, of course, look into the next year and we don't know exactly what it has to offer. It's always that future is always unknown. And so it's a time for us to think about what we've gained, what we've learned in the course of this year, and then build on that as we move forward. So what are the pieces that need to come together to do that? Well, I think Jesus had a hope for us as to how we're to live our lives, and it's contained in John's Gospel. Now, John's Gospel is one that is usually considered to be more of a theological overlay. In other words, there's just not a storytelling, but there's sort of an interpretive kind of part to it that tries to tell us what this all means for us. Well, the verse, and it's just one verse that I'm using this morning, is from John chapter 10, verse 10. And the version that we have reads like this: I have come in order that you might have life, life in all its fullness. Now, it is just one sentence, basically, one verse. To me, it's a really power-packed kind of thing. And that if we really live the way Jesus is intending us, it will make a huge difference in how we live our lives. Now, what I think Jesus is meaning by this is that we're to live our life totally engaged in all of life that comes to us. We're not to be spectators or passive observers, but we're to get on the field and play the game. We're full participants in this life that we live. And so it's a matter of being alert and awake and aware of all that comes to us and being willing to take it all in, the highs and the lows, the good and the bad, to be willing to experience that full gamut of all that comes to us. And so in that process to live as fully as we possibly can. And what that means is that we engage in such a way that we become more confident and more self-assured as we move forward into living our lives. Now, I've often wondered what would happen if somebody took all these various sayings that are attributed to Jesus and put them in today's vernacular. And I found a quote that is attributed to several people, so I'm not going to attribute it to anyone this morning, that I think really says what Jesus would say to us today. And it says this: life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skid in broadside, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." That's how we're supposed to be living our lives. So that's how we're going to think about that this morning. What would it be like for us to get to the end saying, "Wow, what a ride"? Well, I think there are several elements that probably need to converge and come together for that to happen. And first and foremost, I think it has to be a matter of our living in the moment, in the present time. Most of us tend to either look back a lot and think about what has been and what used to be, or we look forward, planning and thinking about what's going to be. And in the process of doing that, we miss today. We miss this moment. And frankly, this moment is all we have. Sometimes we just don't realize how very, very precious these times are and how significant they are because we're so preoccupied doing something else, moving other directions, thinking other ways. I was having breakfast earlier in December with a pastor friend of mine, and he and his wife were married in December, as Mike and I were, and so we were marveling, actually, at all the years of marriage that we'd had, and he shared a conversation that he'd had with someone else, and this other person had asked him how he had come to the point of deciding that this was the person he wanted to spend his life with, and this is the path that his life was going to take. And he said that he had to think about it, and then he had to say that, well, it really wasn't all that intentional. It just kind of unfolded for him, and he tried to respond to things as they came to him. And then he paused a moment, and he said to me, he said, I guess I wasn't paying full attention at the time all these things went on. And isn't that often the case? I could really identify with what he was saying, because these things happen and sometimes we're not there. We're not really present and involved with everything that's going on. And we forget how very precious the time is and the people in our lives are. You know, it's important that we realize that our loved ones will not always be here with us. There are people here this morning who know that far better than others of us, that we cannot always count on that, because loved ones die, relationships fall apart. And so it's important to tell the people we love that we love them now. Well, that's something that I'm really going to try to do a lot better at in 2014, and maybe you'd like to join me on that. Part of my resolution is to try to really be in the moment, to experience this present and not always be thinking about what's next and not lamenting what's been in the past, but to really be present here and now. So I think that's one of the things that we can think about in 2014, of how we can live fully the way Jesus would have us live. There's another element, I think, that has to come together too, and that has to do with loving fully. That means giving our whole selves over to love, giving totally and completely in love. And I'm not sure we all do that very well, because sometimes we're fearful. We're afraid we'll be hurt. We're afraid that things will end, and so we hold back, or we look for certain signs that have to be met before we can decide whether or not this is really loving. But it's important to realize that loving is a risk, because things can happen, things can go on, we can get hurt. But we have to be willing to take that risk and to love if we truly want to live as fully as possible. Love is hard work. It takes time and energy and attention. It takes humility. It takes respect and admiration. It takes forgiveness. It takes loyalty and much, much more. So even with all the risks that come with loving, we have to be willing to do it, because as Alfred Lord Tennyson said, it is better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Now, if we talk about loving being filled with risk, we need to think about life in general, because life is filled with risk. And I suppose it's easy for us sometimes to kind of hide in our corner or cower away in fear and not really not really give it our all, not really step out and take our courage and live life as it's intended to be lived. And I think we have to be willing to get out of our comfort zone and take a risk. We have to try new things. We have to meet new people. We have to have new experiences. And that kind of keeps us alive and really alert and helps us grow. So we have to be willing to get out there and go for it. Yes, it's risky, but the risks are worth it when we really feel truly and fully alive. So, someone by the name of Tim McMahon said this: yes, risk-taking is inherently failure-prone. Otherwise, it would be called sure-thing taking. So we do have to take the risk. So one of my hopes for us in 2014 is that we're willing to take those risks, to get out of our comfort zone and to get out there and really live. Now, one of the temptations that can happen when we decide we're going to go for it is we may want to shortcut some of the ways that we go about it. And that doesn't work. We've got to be willing to take the high road, to do the right thing, to keep high moral character at all times. We all do things sometimes that we regret, we say things we wish we hadn't, we do things we wish we hadn't, and then sometimes we may gossip about somebody, or we may badmouth someone, or maybe we even cheat a little bit in order to win, and maybe it's time to let that go, to leave it in the past, and to make sure that in 2014 we keep high moral character and always take the high road and do our best to stay there. And then there's one more thing that I think has to be an essential part of our living fully, and that is our faith, however we might describe what that is. And notice that I said faith. I didn't say church or religion, and that was intentional, because I fear that all too often, sometimes organized religion is not a very good example of what it means to really be faith-filled. Let me give you an illustration of what I'm thinking about. Some of you may have read that the United Methodist Church, of which I'm a part, has been in the news fairly recently. It was in the news for conducting a church trial for a pastor in Pennsylvania who officiated at a union, a marriage, between his gay son and his partner. And that pastor was thrown out of the church. There was a retired bishop who also participated in a similar kind of experience, and he's been reprimanded by the Council of Bishops. Now, the reasons stated in those instances and in some others that have taken place had to do with saying that these people were in violation of our Book of Discipline, which is apparently the new Bible of the church. It seems to rank higher than the core message of the Bible and the key message of the Bible. Now, you may not agree with me, but what I believe is that stance is not a very faithful stance. Because if it were faithful, it would be in line and attuned with the message that Jesus gave, which is the message of love, pure and simple love. So if we are talking about in 2014 being faith-filled people, then we have to be people of love. If there's any way in which we are discriminating against someone else, that's not love. If there's any way that we are being judgmental of somebody else, that's not love. Our society, and that includes the church, has become, it seems to me, more hate-filled than love-filled, more judgmental than loving and accepting and welcoming. And I think it's time for us to do something about it. I think we here at the Garden, collectively and individually, can turn the tide of the way things are happening. We can become part of a revolution. A love revolution. Now, that's not an original idea. I can't take credit for it. You've heard me mention in the past a friend of mine, a pastor in Houston, whose name is Rudy Rasmus. He's one of the Mavericks, that 10 pastors from across the country who get together to support and learn from one another and challenge one another. Well, Rudy is at a church in downtown Houston that's called St. John's Downtown. And for the last year or so, he has been a part of trying to create a love revolution. He and the people of St. John's are trying to turn Houston upside down and make it a community that is radical in terms of its love and acceptance of all people. Everyone is welcome at St. John's, and I mean everyone. Everyone is accepted there. And I would like to see us here at the Garden think about a similar thing. That if we here at the Garden in 2014 want to live the kind of life that Jesus has said for us to live, then it has to be about love. It has to be about love for one another, love for our planet, love for those who are different from we are, who believe differently than we do. It has to be about justice and dignity and worth and value for all people. None of us can have fullness of life until everyone can experience fullness of life. So, let me ask, are you willing to be part of a love revolution?